if I'm walking with Jesus on a daily basis, those natural opportunities, they just start to flow out. It happens, and I don't have to force it, because the joy of the Lord is my strength, as Nehemiah says.
Welcome to The Same Commission, the podcast from Echoes International about all things mission.
Hi, I'm Jim Armstrong.
And I'm Matt Pitts.
We're with Echoes International,
sharing God's heart for the world and partnering with local churches to support mission.
That same Great Commission the Lord Jesus Christ gave us all in Matthew 28 hasn't changed.
But in each episode, a different guest will chat with us about a current trend in global mission.
So whether you're starting on the journey of mission as a new believer,
or you've been faithfully supporting or serving in mission for years,
this is a podcast for you.
Well, welcome to the Echoes International podcast, The Same Commission. Thank you for tuning in today.
Today in our studio in Bath, we welcome Matt and Erwin. We're grateful that you were able to come in and chat with us, Martin.
Thanks very much, Jim and Matt. Great to be with you.
And we could describe Martin as a friend of the show. First time on the podcast, but we've known him for quite a long time. But for those who don't know him, Martin is an evangelist, an author and church planter. He's the CEO of Counties, which is a charity that exists to make Jesus known across the UK. And that's through a national network of evangelists and church planters, as well as producing schools resources and also providing training opportunities.
Today we're going to concentrate on the theme of being gospel-driven. And this is equally applicable really to all believers, not just those who would call mission partners or those living by faith or all the other expressions that we use.
But I think before we start, actually, Martin, shall we try for 60 seconds?
Okay.
Can you give us kind of a summary of who you are and what you do with Counties?
Thank you. I thought your summary was very good, actually, Matt. But the CEO role of Counties is helping to oversee the whole of the work alongside our trustees, and that work includes the training and raising of evangelists, the support of evangelists. Counties evangelists are living by faith evangelists working across the UK. And also overseeing the development of the resources. Some folks might have heard of Jesus Live or the Life exhibition. So we have schools resources aimed at children in primary school and secondary school. And then more recently, developing training tools to work alongside local churches to raise the temperature of evangelism and disciple making in local churches. So those would be the main areas of my role.
And I think that was plausibly 60 seconds.
Thank you.
Actually,
I did my best.
Must admit, I forgot to start my stopwatch, but
that's good.
But that was excellent.
So we're going to chat about being gospel driven. That's the phrase we've used.
Mm-hmm.
What does that mean for you, and why is it so important?
I think a couple of things come to mind as I was reflecting on that phrase, gospel-driven. The first is, I think when we look at the Apostle Paul in the New Testament particularly, I think we get an example of what gospel-driven looks like. When he writes to the church in Rome, he wants to stop off there, but on his way to pioneer somewhere else. He's talking about going to Spain. Mm. I love the fact that as he writes in his introduction to Romans, he recommits himself and says, "For I am not ashamed of the gospel, for it's the power of God to save those who believe." So Paul is a great model, I think, of what gospel-driven looks like. And, on one level, we have him up on a bit of a pedestal. Sometimes we're in danger as Christians of giving sainthood to some of these early disciples and believers. But I think Paul sought to model, as he wrote to the churches, when he sends Epaphroditus or Timothy or Titus, he says, they live their lives just like I do. They teach just the way I do. And I think he gave a great example of gospel-driven life.
I think you're right there, but again, if you walk into the 21st century and UK today, has that been lost in most Christians? What's the challenge there for us?
I think there's been so many shifts, cultural shifts happen so quickly. And of course, we now live in, I'm sure it'll get overused as it probably already is, but a post-COVID, post-pandemic world. Church has changed, church life has changed. And I think the certainties that I grew up with in Northern Ireland were nothing much changed either in the local church or the society around us very quickly. The speed of change has left many Christians and many church leaders perhaps just feeling bereft as to, do we have the tools to cope with this speed of change? And how do we share the gospel now, today, in the world in which we live? And I think lots of Christians now are disarmed with regard to how I share my testimony, how I tell my story, what is the gospel at a very basic, understandable level, and how can I communicate that in my context. Those are the things I think Christians wrestle with, but in the context of massive change, and also possibly the impact of worldliness in our own lives. So not talking about anyone else, just comfort and prosperity and the kind of things that rob us of that passion to share Jesus.
Matt and I are just back from, listen to that lad. Matt and I are just back from...
So you're going off script this
exactly.
time. Okay, just for everybody, can we just highlight that this is happening?
Just back from South America, and we've spent some time with mission partners. And I don't know whether you noticed this, but every time each of them interacted with a hotel person or someone in a restaurant, there was an opportunity, and they never missed it, to share the gospel.
I love that.
You know?
Yeah.
And that spoke to me quite a bit, actually. I mean, they were doing it naturally. This wasn't something they did because we were there. They were just doing exactly what they did as a matter of course.
Yeah, and that leads on to, I suppose, my next question, in that actually, when we look at the New Testament, you've talked about Paul, you've talked about his example, and you would have many others through the New Testament. The teaching of the New Testament says, be gospel-driven, make that your focus. So that is going to have necessary implications in the lives of every Christian.
Yeah.
And we often on this podcast are talking about mission partners, and we might talk sometimes specifically about those who are full-time in a particular role. But I don't think we're talking about that now.
No.
So what would you say are the daily life implications in the life of the everyday believer who might be listening to this podcast?
You know, often, and those of us who have stepped out into full-time ministry, the longer sometimes you're in it, the more you forget of what the ordinary everyday life that you led, and that most of our listeners or viewers of the podcast will be people who are housewives or in a job or standing at the school gates or going to the supermarket or doing the normal everyday things that people do, and wondering how I can be gospel-focused, gospel-driven in that context. I think that, and what you said, Jim, about your mission partners in South America, where they took those opportunities naturally, I think there is something to be said for developing habits that then become natural. And they're therefore having to be deliberate about those things. So we're teaching in our own fellowship. So I'm one of the leaders at Queensway Chapel, based in Melksham in the south of England. And we have been thinking about the word go in the context of the Great Commission. It's really interesting that the Great Commission there in Matthew 28, the commandment is actually to make disciples. That's the emphasis. Right. The word go is, in fact, there is a translation called the Young's Literal Translation. I was looking at this just recently and I was fascinated by this. Young's Literal Translation, Jesus speaks and he says, having gone therefore. and I really like that. And I actually preached recently on the Great Assumption. The Great Assumption is going. The Great Commission is making disciples. So I want to encourage people to think about the fact that you don't have to wait for a special calling to go. It's as you go or having gone. Wherever you are, in whatever context you find yourself, you are there as an ambassador of Jesus Christ. So I think that would be the first thing I would want to say about that. Then what I've been reflecting on is what habits can we encourage people to develop that will, I hope, start to impact their heart, because we want 1 Corinthians 13. We want to do things out of a motivation of love, not because we feel compelled to do it or that it's a habit. But the things that we've been teaching recently are 3 simple little values. One is for ordinary everyday Christians to understand I am sent. Jesus says that the Father sent me, so I send you. So I am sent. Secondly, I will show, which is a demonstration, practical demonstration of the love and presence of God through acts of kindness or caring. And then the third value is I will speak, learning again how to share simply something about the good news of Jesus. So we actually produced for our fellowship a little card that slips into their mobile phone case or into their wallet or your purse, and it has a little prayer on it that says, "Thank you, Lord, that I am sent. Help me to know who I'm sent to today. Help me to show your love in practical and caring ways, and help me to find a place to speak about Jesus." And so those three values, I think, help unpack what the commission is for ordinary everyday Christians.
I suppose, again, in our modern society today, why do you think then we do lose our focus? What are the things that take up our time? Because a lot of it's legitimate as far as everyday living is concerned.
Yeah, life is busier than ever. I mean, in spite of the interruption of the pandemic, people are still traveling a lot further for work than they used to. So, it used to be that we had time for local church or evangelism or mission or activity. But I think one of the things that has robbed us is this, that we have bought into somehow a sacred secular divide. I remember Mark Green from the London Contemporary Centre for Contemporary Christianity came to a meeting of evangelists, and he challenged us. He listened for an hour, and then he said, "Do you mind if I reflect back to you? What you're talking about doing is training and equipping people to do evangelism the way you do it, instead of helping them to live Christianly," was the word he used, to live Christianly where they are. So I think this sacred secular divide, we have this thing in our minds or our hearts that's very unhelpful. I think that would be the first thing. The second thing is the loss of confidence in the gospel that we've touched on already, and I think we need to help Christians rediscover a confidence in that the gospel is not just true, but it is powerful and it does work, if I can use that word.
Yeah.
And then the third thing is the challenge of I'll use the word worldliness in our own lives. I'm in my mid-50s now, and I've got a nap.
Looking so young.
Thank you, Jim. Thank you. I've got a nap.
Those who are watching on YouTube will be able to see that.
Yes, thank you. I appreciate that you feel that way. You can add your comments on YouTube, I guess. I think I've got an app on my phone. With my pension on it. I could look at it every day. It's so depressing. But it's a great reminder that Jesus said, "Don't store up for yourselves treasures on earth where moth destroys, rust corrupts, and thieves break in and steal." And I think for all of us, we need to allow the Lord to challenge our hearts. What am I pursuing? We're talking about being gospel driven.
Sure.
But what is it that's driving me? Is it comfort? Is it the well-being or welfare of my children or grandchildren? What is it that's motivating and driving the decisions and actions that I pursue each day? And I think that's a helpful challenge for us to reflect. Is it the gospel, and what do I need to change for it to be the gospel?
Thanks, Martin. We'll stop for a moment and we'll come back after the break.
Echoes International, sharing God's heart for the world and partnering with local churches to support mission. Get in touch to find out how you can serve in or support mission today. Pray, support, mobilize, equip. Find out more at echoesinternational.org.uk or subscribe on YouTube. Echoes International. Together with joy.
You're listening to The Same Commission, where this week's theme is being gospel driven. Can I, as Jim has already gone off script, I'm happy to, but actually just
helpfully so,
asking a follow up. There are things that kind of are obvious distractions. Can there also be good things, perhaps even in a Christian context, in the context of a local church, that can also distract us from being gospel driven?
Yeah, I think the challenge is in a local church, and for local church leaders watching or listening, I think you've got to be in leadership in anywhere. You know the different tensions and pressures that come, but in a local church context, the pastoral needs that are so important, the need for good teaching and good ministry, you want the experience of the meeting to be a good experience, whether you have a very open kind of meeting like I grew up in an open brethren context, or whether you have a very well led, sort of gifted band or so on. There's so much time and attention spent on good things. But I think there's a danger that those rob us in terms of time and energy spent. They rob us of, I'll say, keeping the main thing the main thing. There was a Glow missionary working with Glow in the south of France called David Gould many years ago. He's a New Zealander, and he came to a young people's weekend in Northern Ireland when I was in my teens. And he said, I don't know if theologically or practically you can demonstrate that this is absolutely true, but it's helpful. And it was that there are only two things you can do on earth that you will not be able to do in heaven. And he said those two things are sin and tell others about Christ. I guess somebody could theologically throw something back and say that's not quite true, but it's really it's a helpful thing, isn't it? And then he asked us as young people, so which of those do you think you should pursue? Yeah. So that for me, I think is a useful question for church leaders to consider about how easy it is to become distracted. The churches that I grew up in were gospel driven. They had a gospel meeting. They had gospel missions. They had open air work in the summer. They supported the local tent campaign. When the evangelist came, they all rallied together for that. Now the methods and means might need to change because we talked about fast changing culture. But unfortunately, because we didn't quite understand what methods or means we should now use, the focus has dropped in many churches. And so that passion for evangelism and for gospel preaching and gospel ministry has certainly dropped down the order. So my encouragement for church leaders would be to just reflect on that and to begin to work through how we can raise that gospel focus in the church life.
Yeah, I think that's a really helpful one, because sometimes it's not a choice between good and bad.
No,
it's a choice between good and better, isn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah. So on a personal level then, and I think in a moment Jim's going to ask about more practical, like real resources that people can use. Yeah. But on a personal level, if we're thinking of our own discipline walking through life, what is it that we as individuals can do to daily retain that gospel drive, that focus?
There's a brilliant book that Peter Maiden wrote. It was the last book that he wrote. Some will know of Peter Maiden. The last book that he wrote, I think it's about gratitude.
Radical Gratitude.
Radical Gratitude. Thank you, Jim. It's called Radical Gratitude.
Excellent book.
I think that, and it's a deep challenge to me, because it's easy to have a moan. We all have a moan. Maybe not all of us, but some of us have a tendency to do that.
Yeah, I don't.
I can see that you're always bright, grateful, thankful person.
That's of course.
Can I just say, even in the darkest hours of us being stuck in Frankfurt, he was not moaning.
That's good. That's good,
but
Jim.
If you ask my wife,
okay. Those are the kind of people who see us. I think one of the things that we need to, and it sounds terrible because too many evangelical Christians die of hardening of the arteries. I don't know. We ought to, we need to. So I just want to kind of
get that joke in.
Check. No, I got the joke in, but I think it's a useful thing. We shouldn't do things because we ought to do them.
Yeah.
And that radical gratitude as a concept and as a book, highly recommend the book, as you have, Jim, as well. But being grateful for what God has done in my life on a daily basis will help me rediscover what I mean by my testimony. So for an ordinary, everyday person, and that's all of us, let's be honest, we're not, whatever ordinary or normal looks like, it doesn't exist, but we have our own lives to live out. If I can rediscover or be grateful to God for the circumstances of my life, I have got ammunition to share when someone's struggling, when someone's having a moan, when someone's having a bad day or being challenged. I've got something in my life that can shed light on the path for that person. Now we know that light is Christ himself. I am the light of the world. So that So rediscovering a testimony through radical gratitude, I think, is really significant, because then we're not rehearsing what's my testimony, how can I tell my testimony in 3 minutes, ... We're up to date in our walk with the Lord. That would be number one. The second thing is, and I think too many of us have fallen out of the good habits of just daily reading and praying. So just ordinary, everyday walking with Jesus. I think if I'm walking with Jesus, and I know this in my own life, if I'm walking with Jesus on a daily basis, those natural opportunities, they just start to flow out. It happens, and I don't have to force it, because the joy of the Lord is my strength, as Nehemiah says. So those would be rediscover things to be grateful for, rediscover an attitude of gratitude, and then a daily walk with the Lord, and then looking for those opportunities. So I mentioned that prayer, I am sent, I will show, I will speak. And the reason we produced those on these little prayer cards was so that people would see it every day. And I give you a little story. I walked into Asda just a few weeks ago just to grab something that we hadn't got as an ingredient for whatever dinner was that evening. But as I walked in, I didn't have the card out, but I grabbed my phone because my credit card was in it. And I saw the card and I thought, oh, Lord, thank you that I'm sent. I was in a rush, but it just so happened that the person that served me had lost something and they couldn't help me in it. And I was able to, instead of thinking, well, I'm in a rush, typical, I get the shop assistant who's not able to help me because they need something, they've lost their card to swipe or something. I was able to say, can I help you? Do you know where you left it? And just having a change of attitude gave me an opportunity to share something of the love of God in that brief moment. So those kind of things I think would be helpful places to start.
I once heard someone preach, and I've done this a lot since then. Every day in his devotion with the Lord, after he read and prayed, he always asked to give him somebody that he could speak to.
That's great.
And I thought that was quite powerful, actually.
Yeah, I like
that dependence on just being able to get one opportunity just to share the Lord.
So someone has said, Jim, that if every Christian in the country took personal responsibility for the 3 doors either side of them, not everybody lives in a street, of course, but in that way, but 3 doors either side of them, the 6 doors opposite, and prayed about them and prayed for them and showed the love of God to them and started to invite them, whether into our home or a back garden for a barbecue, or look to share the gospel and whatever opportunities the Lord gives, that would reach our nation in a way that we've not seen in generations.
And that's a really challenging way to finish this. You've mentioned the card that you've used in your own fellowship.
Yeah.
What are the kind of resources, if someone's listening to this and is being challenged by this, what are the kind of resources that they can identify or we can point them to help them with their personal sharing?
Two things, I think. And I've got it open to read a bit of the Bible, the Bible app, and there are a number of Bible apps out there, but so useful because most people we're talking to have a mobile phone.
Yeah, that's true.
And so when we've been sharing the gospel with people and they've started to show an interest, I've had people come and say, well, I would like to start to read the Bible, but I don't know where to start. And so we'll introduce them, in fact, with them, download the Bible app. And point them towards a good reading program that they could start on. So having the Bible app ourselves, although I like having a physical Bible and I like it when preachers preach from a physical Bible, it's such a brilliant tool for us to have on people's mobile phone. So that would be one. The second one is, and this one's a little bit more old-fashioned, but I think it's really helpful, Life Words, which used to be Scripture Gift Mission. They used to, and I don't know if they still do, they used to have a little plastic wallet you could keep a little variety of tracts in. I remember having that over a number of years. But to have a piece or some pieces, little pieces of literature that you could use, whether it's a New Testament, whether it's something from one of the Christian organizations that produce tracts, there's something that you're comfortable with, that you like, and that you feel confident to just pass on when the opportunity arises. I think those are two great little things. So the mobile phone app for a modern cultural age, and a piece of literature that you are comfortable with passing on, whether that's a gospel or a tract of some form that you're familiar with.
Brilliant. No, thank you, Martin. And I think that's a good starting point, isn't it, for people? Yeah. Well, final question, Martin, and it's actually not to do with our topic, but to do with you and counties as well. How can we, and those listening, how can we pray for you?
Thank you. That's a good question. Age and stage of life, personally, I think, the Lord's been good. health. I had a stroke 2.5 years ago, and God's been incredibly good. He is anyway, but just in terms of my recovery, but energy, I think, for the work on a personal level. My children, I've got 3 daughters, and they're aged from 24 down to 18. And if anyone has written a brilliant Christian book on parenting your adult children, I'd love to read it. But that's the age and stage we're at. My wife's called Rachel, so if you want to remember us personally in prayer, that would be really lovely. And praying for our children, that would be great. For the work of counties, we're at a significant stage in the work of counties of just seeking to provide additional support for local churches to do what we've been talking about, to help them recenter on the gospel and on the Great Commission on making disciples. Just that we would get that right, and that we would produce the tools that are really the right tools and the most effective for local churches, and that we might have opportunity to engage with churches to support them in the work that the Lord has called them to.
Brilliant, thank you.
Well, thanks.
Thank you, guys.
For coming along. It's been great to speak.
Pleasure.
And it's a tremendous opportunity just to share some of these things as well. So thanks for taking the time. It's much appreciated, Martin.
Thanks, Jim.
And now you count as a friend of the show.
Thank you.
Thank you for listening to The Same Commission.
If you haven't subscribed already, please do so to continue hearing more about mission.
And praying for the good news of the Lord Jesus Christ to reach all nations.
To learn more about Echoes International and how you can serve in or support mission, visit our website at echoesinternational.org.uk or follow us on our social media channels.
Thank you, and see you next time on The Same Commission.